cost and change the model so the model puts more responsibility on the customer. So of course, Randy and Jim don't like that. That's good. But and then we're looking at changing the format. So I drafted it.
Still got a minute.
I forget about it until my alarm goes off 2 minutes before.
Yeah.
Oh, that's today.
Oh, that's today.
Gotta go.
We're going to call the Electric Advisory Board of Leesburg, Florida, to order. Bow your heads for invocation. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity to serve, Lord. Ask that our decisions are in your guidance. In your name we pray, amen. And let's stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, everybody got the minutes sent to them. Are there any changes? If not, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Approval.
Second. Jack, thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Presentations.
We'll go right to Brad. Brad's put together. We've revisited. I don't know how many months we're into this now, but kind of on track here. So we're kind of now just to kind of getting you some system information and some of the things that Brad and the electric department want to do. So probably this month, maybe next month. We'll see how far we get here.
Yeah.
And then probably June, we'll get into budget and rate. Have it. So that way you guys have some recommendation and some voice to the commission as they move into budget time. So, Brad, it's all yours.
So again, last month, Jim Williams talked a lot about budgets, right? And we talked about really the three pillars that we're trying to follow within the electric department. And it was system growth, it was capital improvement, and it was, the system, maintaining the system. So today's presentation is really about one of those pillars, is about system growth. Next month, we'll talk about the other two pillars. At this point, I don't have the specifics of the budget. I just is more of this is the process that goes into that stuff. So it's informal. If you have questions, we can talk and chat along the way. There is some fundamental stuff we wanted to make sure we talk about before we get into the growth discussions. This is, again, our service territory chart. It shows the Fruitland Park service territory up there in yellow. It shows the city of Leesburg in green, and then filling in among the green is the Lake County. Let me back up just a little bit, make sure you know the team that came here today. So Steve Davis is our supervisor for the service planning group. He does all of our designs for our commercial residential projects. Marie Carter is our budget analyst, and so she helps us with our O&M budget. She helps us with cost and trending and predictions. Also with the FMPA budgets is processing the St. Lucie and the monthly fuel budget. And then Chris Adkins, he's our deputy director over the kind of technology side of the house. Greg manages all of the field services side, the construction, the maintenance, the operation, and Chris manages, service planning, the meter shop, the operating control center, that kind of stuff. So going back, that's our service territory. So again, system-wide, we have 5 substations on our system. Each substation is normally comprised or has 2 large distribution transformers, about 32 MVA for each unit. And then there's bus ties that allow us, again, redundancy within the substation itself. One substation has a third transformer, the east sub for Catrali. They have their own dedicated transformer that they purchased. Again, system-wise, I got 26 feeders throughout the territory. These are kind of like tree branches, if you will, that go out, and we have ties to other feeders within the area. You know, again, for redundancy, for reliability, you got some complementary feeders, so you bring them from different substations or different transformers to try to mix an area that you're, again, trying to serve reliably. 28,000 customers and climbing. You know, it's a pretty steady rate that we have. We had a big push when the villages, again, a lot of the discussions that we have at the city commission level is a lot of those conversations are about developments along the 27 corridor, right? US 27. Not all of that has been within the electric territory. Now, of recently, we've had some discussions, and we'll talk about in a minute, about major developments that are happening within our service territory, as well as Fruitland Park.
The Catrali having their transformer, is that something that's common still? If you have like a big industrial user wanting to come to Leesburg, would that be something that you ask them about doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point it's all about, you know, cost and dynamics. You know, they're a primary metered customer as well, so they take care of all the transformers, all of the ties beyond our feed. They manage all that. So the distribution transformers within their property belong to them. They maintain them. They operate them. They went and they wanted, again, a certain level of reliability that is unique for our territory. Having its own dedicated transformer in the station is unique, you know, for that customer. We don't have it anywhere else. Most utilities, we have dedicated substations and transformers for underground feed, but it's rare that you'd have a customer purchase its own unit.
So like an OUC, would they have customers and stuff that way?
So we had Universal Studios as one of the big customers in Orlando, but they still didn't have a dedicated transformer. The agreements that were made with them was, well, we'll only feed you with on transformers within the substations that only feed on underground facilities, right? No overhead exposure. That was the agreement they made with them. So again, Catrali is unique in that respect.
Quick question, and forgive my ignorance if I missed this. Can you kind of clarify what 32 MVA means?
So transformer sizes, or transformers come in sizes, and transformers are what it takes to, in our case, to lower the voltage from the transmission level at our substations. We send it out. We lower the voltage from 69,000 volts, and we lower it to 12,470 at the substation, and we go out to the homes, we lower it again, the commercial 277,480, 12208, or your homes at 12240 for your home. Now, the size, so in a neighborhood, if you look at the villages, St. Catherine, we probably got 8 homes on one 50 kVA pad mount transformer. So 50 kVA, 50,000 kVA for 8 customers, right? Well, all those transformers add up on a feeder. All those feeders add up to the station. So at a substation level, you're talking about a transformer that's, you know, I don't know, a quarter about this room, right? It's a large unit. You know, 32 MVA is a large substation rated transformer. And again, if you look at larger customers, we'll talk about, we have a new project in Fruitland Park for the elementary school. So I got a 1,500 kVA going in for that elementary school, right? Just perspectives, right? 1,500 kVA for a school like that. I think the Chick-fil-A has a 300 kVA for the new Chick-fil-A. Just looking at ratios, right? 50 for a home, 25, it's a pole mount. That's not uncommon to feed 4 or 5 homes, that kind of stuff.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We do have a planned unit addition in the 2029 area. This shows where our substations are located at. Again, we have 5 currently. Airport is way out by the mall. East near Catrali Center is on 27. Pixiola is in Fruitland Park. Well, is it Fruitland Park? Yeah. Fruitland Park, and then north is right at the border of on 468 North Sub. And the new one, the property was purchased last year. It's east of Pembroke on State Road 44 is where the substation location is. Again, another foundational information, if you will. You know, we have all of our 26 feeders, and we kind of keep this feeder information sheet updated that talks about a feeder description. You know, a feeder could, be fed off of North Substation, run south along County Road 468 down to South Road east to St. Catherine. So that's a description. Talk about how many megawatts is on the feeder. Again, a feeder could be 5 or 6 megawatts per feeder. Talks about the critical customers that we serve. You got hospitals, you got communication facilities, you got water and wastewater facilities. That's all built into our priority settings. And so when we manage those priorities, we have a system priority that we manage, and system is, we're a Duke customer, right? They own all the transmission. Our priority from a system is I got to get my substations up. I got to get my main feeders up, laterals, and I work on my customers at the end of the day, the residential. As I bring back the feeders, the customers come back up. Then you got a feeder priority that says I got all these 26 feeders, and what's the most important feeder I have to get back the quickest, right? What's the second? What's the third? So we prioritize them. So we have a major issue, we can make sure we're working on getting those critical customers picked back up. And then you have some manual and automatic load shedding that does come into play. Leesburg is what we call a load serving entity with under frequency load shedding. And so what that means is we participate in the state's management of severe faults that will tend to dip the system. If you look at a seesaw and you got load over here and you got generation over there, you want to make sure it's balanced, right? And if you have a major fault that loses load, well, I go out of balance. And so I have to be able to, compensate for that. I can compensate by bringing other generators back online. If I lose generation, I got to drop the load, right? I got to balance this thing out. So you have some, if the frequency gets really squirrely, if you remember back, I want to say 2007 in South Florida, they had a under frequency issue where FPNL was working on a device and they took out the protective relay scheme and they forgot to put it back in line when they brought the system back. And when they brought it back, there was a fault that the whole state saw. And we saw it in Leesburg. We saw across the state that the under frequency kicked in and everybody dropped a ratio of load in order to balance the state out so the state doesn't collapse. So again, we participate in the load. We're a load serving entity with under frequency load shedding responsibility. So that's our little NERC caveat, if you will.
Quick question. What classifies a critical customer?
So let me get to that. This is our list of our 7 priorities, right? So priority 1 for us is hospital, critical care facilities, major senior centers, also major assisted living facilities. You got to be careful with assisted living facilities because they are the major ones out there that have 100 homes, 150 homes, but you also have a residential home in the middle of a neighborhood that has converted that to an assisted living, and there may be 4 or 5 beds in that. So they fall under this assisted living umbrella. But for us, it really wouldn't fall under priority 1. Again, you're looking at the major senior centers, major assisted living facilities. So that's priority 1 for us. And then priority 2 is our city EOC, right? The operations center over there on Griffin Road, Fruitland Park's operational center, police, fire. So the city's EOC is at the police department. So again, whether or not they're number 1 or number 2, they're falling in there. This building happens to be on the same feed as the police, right? So again, the city hall tags along because it's on that same feeder, if you will. And then you just follow that priority all the way down. Your residential feeders are number 6, and then reinstates Reinstates is somebody that was in power, but due to the storm, a limb fell down on their service and tore off their mast, and they got to rebuild it. So once they get everything built and it cleaned up and ready to go, then it comes back as a reinstate for us. And then finally, this last slide, and I gave you copies. I know it's hard to read, but these are our Priority 1 feeders. Again, if you will, this is just one page of our feeder information list that says, here are the feeders, here's where they're located at. These are all Priority 1s. And over here, the type of priority customer, well, that tells me why they're a Priority 1 feeder.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
On the load balancing stuff at a statewide level, so like when a storm is coming and you're expecting large sections of the state to go off, are they actually pulling down generation then?
No. So a lot of stuff happens all automatically, right? So when we look at what they call the ACE, the area control error is what's managed at the balancing authority level. So it looks at generation and load, and it balances that out. And you have a lot of generators that run in an automatic control, where if it's a loss of load due to a storm, really what we're seeing is loss of load due to solar, right? Solar is one of those things that we're having as a state to manage a lot differently, because you could have a solar farm running 75 megawatts, 74.5 megawatts, and cloud storm comes over, and all of a sudden that drops off. And then the balancing authority has to have generators already running that can pick that up and manage that load, or replace that generation within 15 and 30 minutes, depending on the event, where it's happening. So all that stuff is happening automatically, right? The under frequency is when there is a event that severely impacts the system. The storm's coming in, the rain coming in, the system rides through that all day long.
Like Irma, we had just a huge part of was Irma they had a big part of the state
right.
go down.
So yeah, Irma went right up through the throat of the state, but you lost load and generation at the same time.
Okay, so
what you didn't have is a lot of, you're always got sorry, I'll throw a little bit a different story in there, but there's always a discussion of a storm's coming in, do I shut down generation? Rarely do operators shut down generation in anticipation of the storm. Right. Normally what happens is, the storm comes in, the load is reduced due to the effects of the storm, and the operators are reducing the generation that's being produced. They can take units offline, the easy ones. A gas unit can come offline pretty easy. Coal units, although there's not many of those anymore, you kind of keep those as base units. Your nuclear base units, they'll run up and down with just fine. So normally the storm just kind of takes care of itself. You lose load and generation together, and everything happens just, goes down gradually. But when you're restoring, right, the state is overseeing a lot of the restoration. If you want to pick up load after a storm, you got to make sure that it's okay with the state, that they can manage that generation to meet your load. Just like in the other frequency, you should not pick up the load until you coordinate that with the reliability control down in Miami that's kind of overseeing the whole system. So, all right, so some foundational stuff out of the way. We talk about growth. Well, so we get our growth information from a whole lot of resources, right? Here at the city of Leesburg, we have the DRC, which is established. So if somebody's bringing a new product, they bring it to the DRC for the initial approval, right? It'll go to the DRC before it comes in here for controversy.
Commission that's zoning and that kind of stuff first.
Okay, so.
Goes to the DRC.
Okay, so you will see projects in here for zoning. We'll see it for changes in, well, I guess, you get the PUD that's getting approved or those sort of things. We'll see it come in here. But anyway, the DRC is really the city of Leesburg. The Fruitland Park is the technical review committee. Lake County has their own, project review process. We'll get direct conversation from developers within the service territory. FDOT will talk about projects that they have on the scope, and we'll talk about 441 widening in a minute.
Hey, Brad, let me interrupt you. I'm going to repeat that process for you because I know you guys see it a lot, right? And what you see is before all of this. You guys are seeing an annexation, a zoning, and a land use that goes before the Planning and Zoning Board.
Right.
They make a recommendation. So actually, developer comes in, they go see Dan Miller, and they fill out the application to annex or land use or whatever. Dan makes a report. Let's use, so Treasure Trove comes in, right? How many, 250 units going to be off of 44. We need to annex it, goes to Dan. Dan makes a report. That report then gets presented to the Planning and Zoning Board. The Planning and Zoning Board makes a recommendation. Then that goes to the City Commission for first reading of an ordinance on those three issues: annexation, land use, zoning, if it's an annexation. Then it typically goes to the state for review. Then it comes back to the city commission, second reading, and then it sets. So then there's an approved PUD. So like right now, Treasure Trove is an approved PUD, and they have, I think it's 8 years is what we did to PUDs now. They have 8 years of entitlements. And if they don't get it built in 8 years, they lose their entitlements, and they have to start over again, which is Dan. So what I think the public doesn't see, and you hear us say it all the time in the meetings, is that'll get reviewed. This is a schematic. They can change, but certain things in the PUD, like the densities, the green space acreages, those are lock solid. So what then happens is now this development is going to get built. And so moving from approval to board to build board, it's like maybe in the past, 2 out of 10 projects actually ever got built. We're seeing that move a little quicker these days. So where these guys get picked up is Development Review Committee for the city, Technical Review Committee for Fruitland Park, and Project Review. It's all the same internal boards that each organization has. And it's in our organization, it's House and Public Works. So now a developer has his PUD. He's got his approval, he has entitlements, and now they're actually going to build houses. So before they go to Romac and buy all the lumber, they got to firm up all the stuff. So all the stuff is they got to firm up the lot counts, firm up the road layouts, make sure that water and sewer can review them, make sure that parks review them, make sure that electric has a say so, make sure gas. So there's a million different development things now going on to a bunch of city different departments where we're reviewing it, and it starts in the Development Review Committee. So electric is just one peg in that review process. So they're going to go out, and then I'm gonna stop it there, because then Brad's going to tell you what they do as far now. So you're only in this presentation, you're only going to get what electric does.
Right.
So remember, there's a water component, a sewer component, a gas component, a roads component, and so that's what the DRC is doing, is they're reviewing all of these steps that have to go in before the house gets built. And the DRC is typically triggered when they pull their land clearing permit.
Right.
So what happens at that point? This is just like, you know what, like, we can't get over this property, it's not, Do you have,
It's never happened.
I mean, does the city have like an obligation once it's approved to run power there?
No,
Okay.
we don't.
Yeah.
And we get that question a lot. Okay, on the water and sewer side,
Yeah.
it comes down to we have a general policy that's first come, first serve. So we know we have capacity of X gallons of water a day, which right now is about 2 million MGD, million gallons a day, and we're sitting on we'll be sitting on 2.5 MGD at the sewer plant. A house is typically 100 gallons a day water or sewer, and it can, depending in Leesburg, we run around 250 a day in water. So a little bit, because of the difference in numbers is irrigation. So that's kind of when the skid hits the fan. So we haven't run into a situation where we haven't had capacities. So we haven't said, no, we can't build you because we don't have the capacities. Hence, now that goes back to why we're doing the treatment plant and why we're upgrading the CUP, because those especially on the water side, that's pretty limiting. So if you divide 300 by 2 million, that's about how many houses we have left that we can build before we outgrow the CUP. So all those get hit at the DRC level. So that's when we say we got you and you do your permit and we run that on the water and sewer side, we run that past DEP. That's when those capacities are locked in. And so Cliff will do a monthly report on the sewer side. So I've kept it water, sewer, and then on the gas side, we have the ordinance that requires gas development. So then we sit down and we bang out the costs on the gas side, how much the infrastructure is going to be, what the developer is required to put up. Then we have a separate agreement. That'll go back to the commission. One of the things we're going to be doing in the future is squaring up, making sure electric and gas and everybody operates the same. And just historically, we haven't. Right. So what you'll get now is the electric side. So that's where this. So when we say there's 30,000 units that's been approved, which sounds like a horrible number, crazy big. The question really becomes: does that or does that not get built out?
Well, and also the capacity that they have in storage, you need to know, you don't have 250 houses worth of storage sitting in the warehouse waiting on a development. So you need to know ahead of time a certain time frame that you need to order all your inventory to get it set up, correct?
And yeah,
There's a lot of challenges with supply chain management, right? Right now, we have a large inventory of transformers and cable in the warehouse. Part of it is things took, things that used to take 6 to 7 weeks now take a year and a half to get. So transformers were, over a year to get it. Meters, which have been better now, but meters were 2 years in order to get electric meter in. And so you have some concern about, running out of those elements. Now, for a short time, we had to use, instead of our AMI meters, we use some AMR meters, but we have trucks running and riding in those neighborhoods. So from a billing perspective, it didn't impact our ability to send a bill. But there's some of those constraints that you struggle with just trying to make the ends meet, if you will. So again, from a planning perspective, all this information is coming at you, as Al said. It's coming at you from Leesburg, from Fruitland Park, from Lake County, from developers, from FDOT. I mean, we've been talking about widening the section of 441 from Dixie up to Perkins. For about 6-7 years. Yeah. It's going to happen. We budget for it. Doesn't happen. It's going to happen next year. We budget for it. Doesn't happen. It's a struggle, to get, what's going to come through, what's not going to come through. If you go to the map in the package I sent out, there's a little map on the back. It talks about growth opportunities, right? So everybody should have a copy of that. So again, what we look at is these are all developers that, have gone through one of the processes we just described. You got, up in Fruitland Park, you got a number of subdivisions that are planned. Tells you a little bit of idea how big they are. Then you got down in the north end of our section, you got the 4 phases of Tara Oaks going in. You got a new project we'll talk about briefly on Arbor Park, which is just there right in Fruitland Park, right, just over our boundary. That's the orange one and the purple one next to it. The color really doesn't mean anything. I wish I could tell you it's next year, or the year after. But it's just projects and customers that come to us and say, hey, these things are underway. You got the big one, if you look kind of more to the left side of the drawing, you got State Road 44 that shows the big projects that we've been talking about just south of other side of the road from Pembroke. What else stands out? You got the Sunnyside that we just talked about last month, over there in the Sunnyside area, and then there's a couple projects over there by the airport sub, by the mall, Silver Lake. That's in our territory, and part of it is you got all these projects, and I can't. They're not all going to hit next year. There's no way they're going to all hit, but there's some percentage of these projects going to come through. I think you have some commercial projects shown here as well. So the combination of large residential plots, you got some commercial load going in. So, what do we think is really going to impact us for next year? So we look at some 5-year averaging and says, well, last year I spent, on system growth, I don't have it combined, for subdivisions, just as an example, 5-year average is about $600,000. But in that mix, there's one year that was $1,200, another year of $45,000. You had the $1.5 million, but that was St. Catherine, right? So again, how many subdivisions might we see next year? How many new projects? How many new transformers are going to be set? Lighting, we have a nice lighting rental program that we offer here at the city. But how many subdivisions are going to take advantage of that lighting? And from a lighting perspective, and we'll talk about an example in just a minute. It's our capital outlay. For Arbor Oaks, we're going to spend about $230,000 putting in lighting infrastructure. We're going to pay for that, but the homeowners association is going to pay me about 18 to 20 grand every year for the rest of time, right? They're going to give us 18 to 20 grand a month, a year, 18 to 20 grand a year to pay for that. So a lot of projects, I'm not going to say you just get a dart board and hang it up there and you start throwing at what's going to hit. We try to look at what our past trending is. I think this year so far, we did have 2 subdivisions that ended early this fiscal year. We had some other capital projects a lot of commercial projects, but this year so far, I think we spent about $1.3 million on growth on this fiscal year. So, the map kind of helps us. The past trending helps us to try to nail in to where we're going to be. But how do we pass some of these costs on to the developer? What's the right thing to do with a developer? So our policies have a section in there called customer aid in contribution. So I got 2 examples I want to run through. The first example is a subdivision. So a subdivision comes in, and the one we're going to talk about is Arbor Park in a minute. They come in, and they're going to create a new developers agreement. They're going to come to us, and they're going to, after they go through the process that I'll discuss, they're going to come to us and say, we need a design. We need you to kind of move forward with this project. So we're going to do a design. We're going to do an overhead design and an underground design, because our rates support the overhead infrastructure. The underground is where we've gone with new construction. So the developer's going to pay that delta between the overhead and the underground. And that's going to write us a check, non-refundable. They're going to give us that check between the difference between overhead and underground. So that's part of the developer's agreement. The make-ready work, we talked about the elementary school that's going in Fruitland Park on Uric in Olive. There's a 1,500 kVA pad mount being built. They're going to have a lot of poles along that intersection, that area, are going to have to be relocated due to the road widening, due to the turn-in and turn-outs. So that's existing facilities that we have in place to serve load. So they're going to pay us, again, non-reimbursable, to relocate those existing facilities. Make ready work, right? Line extension and upgrades. So again, the model that we have that we're following with the customer aid and contribution says, what's my cost to build and what's their revenue? Anticipated 4-year revenue is what we're looking at. So cost to build is going to include the underground subdivision. It's going to include the street lighting. It's going to include any make ready's included, right? Make ready, even though they're paying for it, I think that's included. And so that you got all these costs to build, and then the revenue. We go to the developer and say, okay, the project's going to start in January, and they're going to do all their site work. They're going to get all the roads ready. They're going to get the utilities in. That process is going to take 6-7 months. In 7 months, they're going to start building their homes, and they're going to build 10 homes a month until the project's done. All right. So from that information, I can build my revenue model. For the first 7 to 8 months, zero revenue, right? Because the homes are not built. Then the 8th month, I got 10 homes that month, and then 10 the next month, and 10 the next month. So I got a zero growth. It's going to start ratcheting up, and then it's going to plateau. In this example, Arbor Oaks, in 18 months, they're going to finish building their homes. And again, I'm looking at 4-year revenue. So I got a slow ramp. I got it coming up, and then it's going to plateau. And I take that number and I say, well, that's a projection of your revenue. I think that's a fair assumption that we take. We're taking the input from the developer. When are you going to get the site work done, the road work done? When are you going to get utilities in? When are you going to start building homes? And how many homes are you going to build a month once you start? So I got to determine what that anticipated revenue is, and I use that elsewhere in the model. And then finally, the piece of the subdivision says, sorry, I keep walking away from the mic. You got, we don't want to have stranded costs, right? I don't want to have a developer start a project and then midway through decide now financing is going to work out, we're jumping ship, right? So the last thing we do to a developer, again, this is a subdivision, we say, okay, remember that cost estimate that Steve did, the cost to build overhead. Remember that estimate. So what the developer is going to do, you're going to write me a check, you're going to give me a letter of credit, or you're going to give me a bond for that amount of money, all right? And as you develop your lots and your homes, and a resident moves in, and we see 1,850 kilowatt hours, which is, for a home like this, it may be 2 or 3 months that we have an owner-occupied home, then they get, if it's 163 lots, I take in this case, it was $647,000, and I divide that by 163, and they get a check, or they get a credit for $6,000 each time a lot meets that threshold, all right? You follow me? They got 4 years to build it, and when they reach that threshold, they'll get 1,850 kilowatt hours, they'll get that reimbursed. And normally what that means is most often we see bonds come in, and they'll want to see a reduction in the bond, and Marie manages that. She keeps account of when the meter got set and when the meter met the 1,850 kilowatt hours, and then between her and the developer, they'll agree on a number, and they'll credit that amount, and we'll fill out the forms, and slowly over time, those developments get completed. So a good example of that was Lake Denham Estates. They just finished their build-out. About 700 homes when you look at phase 1, 2, and 3. They just got maybe a handful of homes left over there. So, you know, things went pretty good. They did ask for an extension, but I'm not sure they really had to lean on that extension. I think they got their homes built without the extension. So again, that's a subdivision. A lot of numbers we're kicking around, but overall, it says, hey, this cost to build is high. So how do I look at the developer to share in that cost to build? Okay. So that's an example for the subdivision. The commercial is pretty much the same discussion point. You have the conversation that says, you know, I gotta determine what their 4-year revenue is. And again, the 4-year revenue, just so we're transparent, that's the same model that Duke uses, the same model that Seco uses. And again, when we look at where we're located at, our nearest neighbor is Duke and Seco. They're around us. So somebody building in the Central Florida area, they're going to see a lot of consistency between those models that all three of us utilize. So again, with a commercial account that comes up, you know, when are you going to begin your site work, and when's the property going to be fully up and operational, right? So there's again a delay between, it's going to take me 7 or 8 months to do my site work, to build the building, get it fully operational, get somebody in there, get the Chick-fil-A selling chicken, right? When's that going to happen? And so, you know, I'm going to have zero revenues until it starts, and then it's going to ramp up to that level, right? There's not going to be a slow ramp building 10 homes a month. It's going to go from 0 to whatever their model is.
But they're not paying anything up front for the product, for the lines, for the...
So again, I have the model that I have to look at. So let's look at Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is from a cost perspective. I had a restaurant there already, right? I had Mojo's there. That got demoed, it got removed. The transformer feed and them got removed. But right behind in the back over there, there's a pull box. There's a primary enclosure that I have my underground facilities at. So when I look at a customer like Chick-fil-A, their cost to build isn't that high comparatively, right? I got to bring 2 runs of primary and conduit. I got to set a pad. I got to put the transformer there. All the labor about that. I mean, don't put you in a spot, but you remember what that one was cost for 300?
With the new transformer prices, it's probably about 50,000.
So 50,000, right? So what's Chick-fil-A's revenue over 4 years? Not including the 6-7 months it was before they started selling chicken. But what's their revenue on a monthly basis multiplied by 4 years? When you do the math, you're going to get a customer like Chick-fil-A that says my revenue exceeds my 50,000. So there's no cost to them. If my revenue exceeds the cost to install, there's no customer aid and contribution, right? It's when the model is the other way. When I'm paying more than your anticipated 4-year revenue. And we're trying to be fair with the revenue when we do the projection. Again, you talk to the customer. When are you going to start the project? When do you think Chick-fil-A is going to be fully up and operational? So use those time frames and you can run with it. So I got 2 examples. I think pretty much everything was there in that. So the next slide is Arbor Park Subdivision Phase 1. Now this particular example is their costs are very high. I say they're high because we have some main feeder that we call it, main conductors going through the center. Because this subdivision is phase 1 of 3. It's going to connect all the way from Thomas Road at Martin Luther King. It's going to go all the way to 468. And so we as the electric utility are going to bring in what we call 1,000 aluminum conductor, so our large underground conductor. We're going to bring it in as a feeder tie starting here at phase 1, and we're going to go all the way across to 468. When we're done, we're going to have, the customer is going to have a very reliable system that has main feeder. It'll have switch gears going out. So your subdivision, as an example, didn't have any million going through there. No switch gears. Switch gears and the large goes with the larger conductor. Very expensive stuff, right? Yours feeds right off the main road. I got some 4-aught probably, some 1-aught stuff. So from a building perspective, it wasn't as expensive as this project will be. So again, some of the factors that increased. So if you look at the total cost to build, it's going to I'm sorry? Yeah. Right where, yeah.
You said Thomas to 468?
Well, right now, yeah, the entrance is going to be at Martin Luther King and Thomas.
Okay.
Phase 1 is going to go in, I don't know, a mile or so in, quarter mile, half mile in. Phase 2 and phase 3 will ultimately take it all the way to 468. Okay? Phase 1 will not get me that far. But again, factors why it's $1.6 million for us to build it. It's large conductor, it's large switch gears. That's all a factor of it. There's some rework needed at the Martin Luther King Thomas Road area, and there's a line extension needed. I got to extend our primary, our main feeder, from the Martin Luther King on Thomas Road all the way up to Urick. Along Thomas Road. Now, luckily, years ago, we put in some 6-inch pipe, so the cost isn't as high as it could have been because the infrastructure underground is already in the ground, but we still got to pull the primary, still got to make it up, got to put in all those pull boxes. So, again, cost to build $1.6 million, but the customer aid contribution, $720,000 that they're going to pay us. One of the reasons is because of their cost, their anticipated revenue, like I said a moment ago. It's going to be 6-7 months of zeros. It's going to creep up until it hits the 163 over an 18-19 month period, and then it's going to plateau. So we calculated the revenue to be, what's the number on there, Steve? Did I not put it on there? No, there it is. Estimated revenues. See it? $830,000. That's their anticipated revenue, okay, over 4 years. The cost to build the underground infrastructure is $824,000. So the revenue will exceed the cost to build the infrastructure. And they'll have a credit of $7,000 to $8,000 they'll carry on to the line extension. But the line extension is going to be about a $300,000 expense that they'll pay probably $290 of the $300,000 because of where their revenue fell.
That's $5,000 a home.
It's $6,000. At the end of the day, when you look at what they're, again, this is, so when they look at, well, I don't want to point over there, but you see almost the second bullet from the bottom, the bond letter of credit, remember that $647,000 is the cost to build overhead. So that's the bond that they'll give to the city of Leesburg. And they get refunded that amount based on each lot over 4 years. So that money, they'll get that back as they build it. The 719, they do not get that back. That is all non-refundable. Again, the city is still paying out of our pocket. I thought it was $830,000 that we end up paying that, out of pocket that's not covered under the CIC. Just the difference, 719 minus 1.56. So that's what we pay to have this, new subdivision. Now, again, over time, the revenues come in. Again, we're as an electric utility or gas or water, we're in for the long haul, right? I mean, we're making our money over the lifetime, not over a short project. And finally, I added a bullet in there about rental lighting, that $240,000 that the city will pay to install the lighting, and that is included in that $1.6 million. And as everything gets built out, our rental agreements will share that they'll pay us $18,400 each year, really, until the cows go home, whenever, for the duration of time. There's no end on it. It doesn't go away when the capital is rebuilt. But, there is some responsibility for us as, down the road, that if the lighting fixtures fail, we replace them. If the pole gets damaged, we replace it.
Is that a standard kind of payback period that everyone else uses for the lighting?
Well, I got 2 data points. Orlando had a rental light agreement as well. Their capital was replaced over 20 years. And then after the 20-year capital, it went on to, you still have O&M, you still have energy costs, those sort of things went into it. City of Leesburg, this is kind of in perpetuity, if you will. Again, our obligation at the city, though, is to maintain and replace those lights well after 20 years. Orlando, their 20-year lifespan, that was at cost once the 20 years runs out. So that's an example kind of where, again, how do I got to build this stuff, but these, I have to look at a fair way to share the cost in which to build this, right? Not every project requires a line extension. Not every project has make-ready work. Every project has a subdivision and a cost and an anticipated revenue. But this project, again, not every project requires us to pull in $1 million, our largest conductor and switch gears along the way. It is from a reliability, this is the top subdivision that we'll build. It'll have redundancy that, others won't have as a result of it. The next slide is an example of a commercial project, I got a meeting warehouse going up in Fruitland Park, up at Cook and 27, 3-phase, 300 kVA pad mount. Cost to build, $66,700. Again, this is, I don't know how much primary is included on it, but
Just for the service is not much.
again, for us the cost of our equipment has skyrocketed over the years. So again, 300 kVA pad mount, $66,700. Our cost to build, Steve's look at the revenue. This Customer has a couple of mini warehouses already in our territory, so it was very easy for him to find a comparison. 33,000 is their net revenue over 4 years, anticipated revenue over 4 years. Subtract the 2 at their CIEC, they'll owe us 32,918 cost to build, right, over revenue. And then they have some make-ready work. They have a line in the rear of the property. They want to move to the front of the property. I'm moving existing facilities, $118,000. So they'll pay the total of those two numbers, the
It's
118.
100 So they're going to cut a check for 150 grand.
Yeah, they'll have
They
to.
don't get that back because they didn't ROI the full cost.
It's non-reimbursable. The capital doesn't have any, loading criteria for any kind of reimbursements. That's not the capital, the model for our commercial customers. So we look at this model for here. We look at this model for the new elementary school. Al, I imagine there will be some discussion at your level because we're going to give them an estimate for relocating the overhead poles. I'm not sure how Lake County wants to manage that, but that's part of the process.
No,
They need to negotiate with Fruitman Park.
Hey, Brad, do this in the inverse. Let's say there was the 4-year return on investment was 70 grand. And so it was greater than the 66 to build.
Okay.
Then they just give us a check for the 118.
Yes, sir. The make-ready work supersedes it. Not so. Said it once. We'll say it again. Make-ready work doesn't have anything to do with revenues, right? You're asking us. The developer is asking us to relocate facilities that are there needed to serve other customers. If I have to serve other customers, then they're going to pay me to relocate. We did at Venetia Isle. Remember when they started that project? You got that subdivision in the back that we had to redo the feed for that. So they stroked us a check for relocating existing facilities. So that's kind of the models that we look at. One of the questions I heard earlier, from Tim is, how do you, what's the time frame on some of these projects? What we do weekly with the electric department, we have a meeting up once a week on basically project scheduling. And it's 14 pages, and it starts off the back of our projects and apartments in Fruitland Park, commercial, city, and Lake County that are just discussions at this point. Nobody's really moving forward with a project. It's gone through the DRC. Somebody's come and talked to Steve about it. When things start to move up on the list is when developers start getting the agreements in place for a subdivision. The commercial customers start working through any CIEC that they owe, and then it starts moving up from the concept. It moves it up to design. It moves it up to the finished product. It moves it all the way up to scheduling. What we're working on today, what we're going to work on next month. And we look at our pole-on transformers. And again, just giving you an example of 50 kVA pad mount transformers. They're kind of our bread and butter for subdivisions. Right now I got about 120 in a warehouse. 120 at 20,000 a piece, 30,000 a piece. All right, so 10,000 a piece at 120 of them. So Steve has the first subdivision. So the issue that I'm struggling with at some point is, when do I need more? But Al, hear me out before we say anything. So I got 120.
He's already said no.
This is a sore subject.
No.
This is a sore subject, by the way.
But I got 120 in the warehouse. Well, Steve's gonna this subdivision we just talked about, Harbor Park. We're getting ready this week. I hope to. He's having a pre-construction meeting with him this week.
Fruitland Park construction.
So that's going to happen this week. We have to finish the numbers, Al, that we talked about here and get the blessing. We've already kind of redrafted it, the developer's agreement to more of a resolution because we know it has to come before the city commission. So we're moving in that phase. So anyway, when Steve does the design and its design's finished and the customer's paid, well, these 20 transformers, 30 transformers get allocated. And so they get reserved for the project. So, all right, 120 minus 30. Then I got another project coming in, another 30 transformers. So at some point, the number will get down where I have 120 in the yard, or maybe this one's completed, but I'll get to a point where I only have a few that are actually eligible to be used elsewhere because they've all been reserved for these subdivisions that are underway, that have paid their money, that have all rights, that they need to get serviced by their need date. But at some point when they get allocated and we look at a 2-year or at least a 1-year window on when they'll be in, I may have to initiate an order, right? So that's what we struggle. The first thing we talk about in every meeting is pad mount transformers. What do we have in stock? When are they going to be allocated to a project? When do I have to do the next order? So right now on the larger units, the 1500s, the larger one for commercial accounts, they've been able to deliver them pretty well. And so we're living within the min-max that we set up. For a 500, which are used a lot, we may have a min of 2. Once I get down to 2, I reorder, 2. So I replace them. And that process has been managing pretty well because I always have to keep a spare on hand in case something happens. But I also understand if I lose a 300, a 500 is in a pinch, I could use that as long as it meets the loading criteria. So, we have options that we keep in our back pocket as well. But, we do look and talk about every day, when do I need to order next? Right now we have a large reserve in the warehouse. And we talked about this project, right? Arbor Oaks. Everything I need for that project, we're going to pull from the warehouse. I don't have to initiate an order for anything, right? Minor stuff, maybe. All the major stuff's in the yard. Primary cables in the yard, transformers in the yard, switchgears in the yard. So, we're trying to pull from our reserves as best we can, but I still have to look at the delivery time and materials to make sure they meet customers' expectations.
So at some point, consider just having 2 options for developers where it's when we sign the PRC, we'll order your stuff and there's no charge for that. Or charging some sort of capital cost, we'll guarantee your stuff when you need it. We'll hold it in our inventory, but you gotta pay that 5% a year carrying fee.
Well, again, the supply chain issues that we're dealing with now are getting better. I mean, again, in the past, our agreement was always with Gresco, our supplier. And basically, our agreement with them says we're going to buy all our transformers from you, but you got to guarantee me when in 6 weeks of a request, you're going to have my quantity there. And they meet that. And we went there for years. That was acceptable. They're not in my warehouse. I'm not paying for them. I only pay for them when I bring them in. So the process is smooth. Right now, supply chain went way out of whack. Things are coming down a little better. I don't know, Commissioner, whether or not we need to consider another cost model other than what we just shared, but I think we're trying to look outside the box and say, what's fair? What can we pass on to the developer? But still, try not to look like we're difficult to deal with. But I can't put ourselves in a financial burden in order to bend over backwards. Again, you developed your property. These numbers weren't anywhere near what you dealt with, and so these numbers are quite a bit larger.
I don't know what you call these people on board, but I'm not a commissioner anymore.
Well, if I'm going to make an error, I'd rather make it that way than another way.
A good deal. Any questions? Thank you very much. Very informative.
Well, next month, Chris is going to be here. We're keeping the same schedule date. Chris is going to be here. I'll unfortunately be out of town, but we'll talk about capital improvement, planning, and budgeting, as well as budgeting for kind of just maintaining the system. Al, if you want, we can get into specifics about the budget, or we can wait till one more meeting.
We're going to wait to see internally how far we get on the budget side.
So
We'll definitely hit it June.
there's enough, I think, just to kind of whet the appetite. There's this system analysis that Chris does each year that says contingency analysis, that says what happens if, right? I take a component out of service, what happens, how does the system respond? And you go through the entire system looking at, I take this feeder out, how does the system respond? Oh, by the way, I have to take it out under the worst loading conditions possible. So middle of summer last year was the worst loading conditions. So I take this feeder out under the worst loading conditions. How does the system respond? And you go through each feeder. And after you go through each feeder, you go back to the substation. I take this transformer out. Now I lose 2 or 3 feeders. How do I respond? Take this one out, work through the whole system. So at the end of the day, your weak points, your areas of concern get
Elevated.
well, they get shown, elevated up, so we can see it. Now we start talking about, well, how do we fix it? How do we plan for that, right? When we talk about the customer's responsibility, we got some customers over on Register Road. You know where that is up north, Fruitland Park. So the developer agreement will say, hey, you got to I got to upgrade this line from the new subdivision out to 27. Mr. Developer, you're going to pay for that, right? But the 27 stuff, well, that falls back on us, right? And so those are some of the struggles you look at. Is I go back to the dartboard. Where's the growth going to go? Is Fruitland Park? Are all these subdivisions going to unleash in Fruitland Park? I don't know. I mean, right now I can tell you Arbor Oaks Phase 1 looks like it's coming down the road. Where are we going to go next? You know, Steve's thinking we're probably going to go out to the old golf course next. So that's a piece of the dynamics that says where are we going to go next. So that's all I had for you.
So do you now play cards on whether you can order your transformers or not, or how do you do it?
I tell you, I'll make one comment. Al is right much more than Al is wrong, and so storm's going to hit, storm's not going to hit. We're not going to get impacted, right? We don't get impacted. You know, hey, you're going to have a lot of subdivisions. I think we're going to have 2 or 3 hit. Nah, things are slowing down. You know, it's hard to argue with him because he's right more often than not. But
write down the lotto numbers, please.
Yeah. I don't have to share that $1 billion, right?
I mean, the struggle is, you know, we got a lot of dollars in the inventory, more than we've ever had, and we have to start pulling from it. And our plan is, and this year is, we've stuck to that. We got to pull from inventory and pay that down, or use those items.
And Dan, you asked about that earlier too. At least for my desk, so my desk starts December 2013 till COVID 2000. We really never had a huge inventory issue. We were always able to get stuff, and his inventory number stayed. So that was kind of a trick of the trade, right? So it took some experience, like, where's Brad's money going, right? Holy cow, what are you doing with all this inventory? So it's kind of in a lot. Long story short, the inventory never really became an issue till COVID. Yeah. And then when everything shut down, the ability to get stuff, and then the backlog. I think we still have bucket trucks that we ordered 4 years ago that haven't shown up. Yeah. And so then they get all wigged out before I get wigged out because they're building stuff. So I'm always watching the cash number, and then one day I'm like, so we start having, so that's kind of, so they started stocking up on inventory. So when they used to keep their inventory, say pre-COVID, $2 to $3 million sitting out there, man, I'm scared to say how much is sitting out there now because you don't be robbers, right? If you could actually pick up a transformer, but so now they're sitting $6 to $8 million. So that's a delta of $4 to $5 million, and you see that number shows up on the cash graph. So. That's where the arguments start coming in and re-looking at the CIACs and are our numbers tight there? So those are kind of things now that we're doing, kind of lesson learned from COVID and where we're at now.
But if you went from 3 to 6, 1.5 of that is just inflation.
Right.
If you have the same amount of stuff.
Yeah.
Like you can't,
and so it's all snowballing. So now we need more stuff and it's more expensive. And now so. And the best story is a meter, right? A meter was $150, something like that. Now a meter's like $300, $400.
2-year delivery.
The normal, they talked about the 5 kVA transformer. It used to be $2,500. Now that's like $5,000. So
Probably not a developer. It sounds like you're using like today's cost.
that's,
So
yes.
we're very careful.
Yes.
In the estimate that you pull, you have the average cost and you have the last purchase price. And so the average, you buy something today and it's thrown in the average right away that says, I paid 10 grand today. Last month I paid, 7 grand. And so I average that together. And that's what our estimates are looking at.
Today, like,
Probably the other,
business, we're not using an average in this. I'm using a replacement.
yeah, so on that number two,
Yeah.
and I think we're in the process of doing that now, but where we're going to end up headed is having a true up cost in these contracts. So if we miss under or over, there's a true up one way or the other at the end.
Have you ever had a developer come to you and say, I'll buy all the materials?
No, the worst, I say worst.
I mean, some of the big ones like KB Homes or somebody like that.
Sometimes they want to get into pipe business. They're already, well, I should say the Villages.
The Villages was different.
They install everything and
Right.
they manage that whole process, right?
And gas too. Gas is because you'll have people who will put in their gas infrastructure instead of cut us a check. That's happened on occasion.
So we do let developers put in their pipe if they want to, but we provide the pipe because I don't want,
Okay.
different inferior quality. So they may save a little bit of money on that, but they're not saving.
I was just kind of
a ton
curious.
money.
And
how fluid it
water and
was.
sewer is different too. Typically, your developer fronts that cost.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll work pioneering agreements with them if their developments have a well, you're going from point A to point B and you only need a 4-inch main, but we need to get you to point C. So we want you to put in an 8-inch main.
Yeah.
So, that's the pioneering agreement so that C can hook up to B. And so we don't see that as much on the electric side of the house. The water sewer side is more developer driven. They pay for it, they dedicate it, we take it over.
So this is only one of three.
One
got-
of four,
One of
really.
four.
Gas, water,
Gas, water,
sewer,
sewer.
electric.
Boy, they have a huge cost, the developer does, right off the bat.
They do.
I didn't realize that. Okay, anything else? All righty, Jackie, anything for the good of the order? Roll call? Yes, ma'am.
No, I'm all good.
Nothing for me, Dan? All righty, motion for adjournment?
Second.
Thank you.
We'll see everybody next month.